الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله.
When it came to dusty Najd down over in Arabia, the Ottomans didn't really care, because they were really never there. The region was resource poor, sparsely settled, and a journey difficult to bear. The coastal regions of Arabia, however, were a wholly different affair. Not that the Ottomans ruled Arabia's eastern and western flanks directly either, but here at least they were invested in governance by proxy, through mutually advantageous arrangements with local vassals. Ahsa and the nearby Shiite town of Qatif first came under Ottoman control during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1550s. A century on, the Bedouin tribe of Banu Khalid expelled the Turkish garrison force that had been stationed there, though they inevitably opted to ally with the Ottoman government in Baghdad. Ahsa had a dynamic economy built on trade and was of strategic as well as economic significance. Now came the turn of the Wahhabis. It was Ahsa's ruler, Suleiman bin Muhammad bin Ghurair, who had blackmailed Uthman ibn Muammar to get rid of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. In addition to being opposed to the Wahhabis' call to Tawheed, the sexually promiscuous Suleiman was affronted at their egalitarian enforcement of Sharia. But Ibn Muammar's cutting Ibn Abdul Wahhab loose, rather than cutting his throat, made things a lot worse for Banu Khalid plc. Unlike Uyayna, Suleiman had no leverage over Dir'iyah. Ibn Saud had no landholdings from which the tax revenue could be withheld, which meant that Ibn Abdul Wahhab's pact with Banu Saud was a disaster for Banu Khalid. There was a strong Najdi contingent in Ahsa, preaching and teaching their Tawheed amongst the hodgepodge of Rafidi and rebellious creeds that were represented there. In Ahsa, the Najdi Dawah had its fans. It was only a matter of time before the Shiite hit them.
يقول: هل في قلوب علماء الشيعة ذرة من إيمان؟ نحن لا يعلم ما في القلوب إلا الله، لكننا على يقين أن عقائد الشيعة علمائهم وجهلائهم عقائد كفرية، عقائد باطلة، عقائد شركية. بل إن نعمة الله الجزائري في كتابه الأنوار النعمانية يقول: وأما الإله الذي خليفة نبيه أبو بكر فإن هذا الإله ليس إلهنا، كما أن هذا النبي ليس نبينا، كما أن هذا الخليفة ليس خليفتنا. والفضل ما شهدت به الأعداء. هؤلاء يشهدون على أنفسهم، فكيف نشهد عنهم بخلاف ذلك؟
In May 1793, a gang of Shia and criminals murdered nearly 30 preachers and representatives whom Abdulaziz had sent to Ahsa to teach and instruct the people. A few months later, the Wahhabis returned in force to subdue Ahsa. By 1795, the capture of Ahsa and Qatif from Banu Khalid was complete. Prior to 1795, the Ottomans had regarded the Wahhabi problem a local one that could and should be resolved by the Peninsular Arabs themselves. But with the loss of Ahsa, Constantinople lost her leverage in eastern Arabia, and the Ottomans for the first time recognized the Emirate of Dir'iyah as an international problem. The thought that the Hijaz could go the same way as Ahsa was for the Porte simply unconscionable. However, that outcome was looking increasingly likely, especially as only that same year the Wahhabis delivered Makkah's Sharif Ghalib's forces another defeat in the desert. And within but 2 years, Dir'iyah won the allegiance of the bulk of the tribes who had not already thrown their lot in with the Najdis. The Dir'iyans also wanted to add the prosperous port city of Kuwait on the confluence of the Tigris-Euphrates to their estate. But the British, under the banner of their loathed East India Company, had already set up shop there in 1792. So when the Dir'iyans made their move on Kuwait in 1795, the British came to the port city's aid. This was the first time that Wahhabis went to war with the British. It wasn't to be the last.
Between then and 1795, the British helped Kuwait repel Saudi assaults on the town.
Further down the Arabian coast, the Dir'iyans were having far greater success. Since 1722, the territory that roughly encompasses present-day UAE, was ruled by the Qawasim, a federation of Sunni tribes led by the Qasimi dynasty, the same dynasty that still rule Ash-Shariqa, Sharjah, and Ras al-Khaimah today. During the 1780s and 90s, during Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's lifetime, the Qawasim took the Sheikh's dawah to heart, becoming something of a maritime Wahhabi vassal state. Appropriately, the Qasimi flag was formally adorned with a Quranic phrase, "Help from Allah and a near victory." Buzzing with convert zeal and boasting a powerful navy, the Qawasim sought to end the rising European maritime encroachment into their sea lanes, and this put them directly in the line of fire of British sea cannon. The Sultanate of Oman had been the principal enemy of the Qasimis, and with the Qawasim espousing Wahhabism, the rivalry between them and the Ibadis of the Khalij got even more real.
For real.
Becoming more sharply religious in nature. The stakes increased even further when Great Britain picked a side. London, via their base in Bombay, forged an alliance with Muscat against the Wahhabi Qasimis. Thus, while the land-faring Wahhabis would flex their muscles against the mighty Ottoman Empire, being adept at maximizing their desert power, their co-confessionist Qasimis would sail out into the Indian Ocean to do battle with British boats and finesse their mercantile fleets. Not to be outdone by the Brits on the high seas, the Ottomans also decided it was high time to take direct action against Dir'iyah. In 1797, 2 years after the British had staved off the Saudi conquest of Kuwait, the Ottomans prepared to conquer the Saudi capital itself. The Mufti of the Ottomans prepared the immoral groundwork, declaring the Wahhabis disbelievers, and whoever fights them and dies a shaheed, a martyr. Military preparations went to the Ottoman viceroy of Baghdad at the time, Suleiman Pasha. He recruited one Thuwaini bin Abdullah, a one-time ally of Banu Saud, who had been granted refuge by them in Dir'iyah, to invade the country that had given him sanctuary.
Traitor.
Thuwaini amassed a huge, well-armed and well-provisioned force, taking the scenic route from Basra to Ahsa, gathering more men and supplies along the way, most tellingly 12 Shiite malcontents. On June 1797, Thuwaini was poised to make his move upon Dir'iyah, but was suddenly killed by one of his manslaves for reasons known only to the two of them. The traitor was out-traited, and Emir Abdulaziz now burst out of Dir'iyah to chase the invaders all the way to Ottoman Kuwait, seizing rich pickings from the retreating army along the way. This was a most humiliating defeat for the Ottoman's Iraqi vassal, so the following year, October 1798, Suleiman Pasha sent an even greater force against the Wahhabis, under the command of his deputy and son-in-law, Ali Kakhya, or Kiakhya Pasha. Interestingly, a representative of the British East India Company inspected Ali Kakhya Pasha's camp on the eve of its expedition. While the Englishman was sufficiently impressed with the material preparation, he was scathing in his assessment of the commander, on account of
the ignorance which the Kiyak displayed of military affairs, and on the absurd and haughty manner in which he accustomed himself to treat the friendly Arabs who had joined him, and on whom he had principally to depend when he entered the most difficult part of the enterprise. The failure of the expedition was entirely owing to the improper, spiritless, and cowardly manner in which Ali commenced the attack on El Hassa.
Contrast the ineptitude of some of these Ottoman client commanders and the contempt with which they held those they led against the steadfastly loyal warriors the emirs of Dir'iyah could rely on. Ali Kakhya Pasha besieged in succession 2 Saudi fortresses in Ahsa. The sieges failed. After 9 months of achieving nothing but loss, Ali Pasha fled back to Iraq before Emir Abdulaziz could send a relief force to finish off his demoralized troops. Suleiman Pasha was left no choice but to sign a 6-year ceasefire with Dir'iyah, it finally having dawned on him that his professional Ottoman army, even bolstered by local mercenaries and auxiliaries, was no match for the rising power of the Saudis. Of course, Selim would have wanted to dislodge them from Ahsa, but faced with more pressing troubles closer to home, this was 1798, the year of Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, Ahsa was left in Wahhabi hands for the foreseeable future. And with the Ottomans occupied with Egypt's French occupation, and with quelling a Serbian nationalist revolt, the Wahhabis would continue to test the Mesopotamian defences whence Selim had sent his forces against them. Barely a year had passed when the Shia of Najaf violated the 6-year ceasefire. Reports are conflicting as to whether 300 Sunnis whom the Shia killed were merchants trading in Najaf, or if the slain 300 Dari and Emiratis were providing escort to an Iranian Hajj caravan returning home from pilgrimage. Whatever the case, the Wahhabis demanded land for peace as compensation. But Suleiman Pasha, the governor in Baghdad under whose jurisdiction the Shiite pilgrimage cities of Najaf and Karbala lay, refused to pay, so the security situation spiraled. Banu Saud were now firing on all cylinders, and would do so for the next few years. For 12 days in 1801, they blockaded Basra. The following year, in 1802, the Ottomans and the Wahhabis almost came to blows by Najaf, but the latter chose not to attack, allowing the Ottoman troops to return to their barracks and averting an all-out war for a further decade. However, the Najdis would not allow the massacre of their merchants / Hajj caravan security detail from several years earlier to go unanswered. So in April 1802, they marched deep into Mesopotamia, defeating the forces they encountered. But those bouts were more like a spar compared to what would go down in Karbala. Karbala is a city built around the burial place of Hussein bin Ali. The local Ottoman authorities didn't dare risk battle so close to their power base in Baghdad, while most of the residents of Karbala were also AWOL on ritual Rafidi pilgrimage to the burial place of Hussein's father, Ali bin Abi Talib, in Najaf. Consequently, the army of Arabian Najd entered Karbala in Iraqi Najd virtually unopposed. There, the Saudi forces set about dismantling the egregiously elaborate shirk-inviting structures and domes over the 12 worship tombs, as per the inspired instruction given to none other than Ali bin Abi Talib himself. Shall I not send you upon the mission with which the Messenger of Allah ﷺ sent me? Asked Ali rhetorically. Do not leave a graven image but that you efface it, and do not leave a construction over a grave but that you level it. Demolishing the Shia shrines of Karbala is an established practice of Sunni sovereigns, for Banu Saud were preceded here by almost 1,000 years by Banu Abbas, by the first ever Hanbali ruler, the Abbasid Caliph and stalwart of Sunnidom, Ja'far bin Muhammad bin Harun al-Rashid, aka Al-Mutawakkil ala Allah. In 851, Mutawakkil ordered the destruction of the grave of Hussein bin Ali and all human habitations in its immediate vicinity, turning the area into farmland so as to prevent pilgrimage to Karbala. But some Asharis, giving away Shia sympathies, have disapproved of the demolitions.
طبعا الحسين عليه السلام علم الشهداء وسيد شباب أهل الجنة كم مرة نبش قبره أيضا من سنية متعصبة كالمتوكل وقبل 150 سنة وسوي بالأرض قبر الحسين عليه السلام. هذه عقلية المسلمين.
Sufism-minded Ash'aris, along with Shi'is, will oppose Atharis on two grounds. One, both the Ash'a'ira and the Rafida deify sheikhs and venerate their shrines, such as through istighatha, seeking help from the occupants of graves and calling upon the dead, whereas the people of Tawheed seek from Allah their need and call upon Him, the ever-living, instead. As we recite in every raka'ah from Surah Al-Fatiha.
إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين.
2. Both Ash'aris and Shi'is conceive of the divine via Ilm al-Kalam, speculative theology, essentially Aristotelian theophilosophy with an Islamic veneer, courtesy of Mu'tazilites. The Abbasid Caliph who initiated the Mihna Inquisition,
Al-Ma'mun ibn Harun al-Rashid,
was both Mu'tazili and Shi'i. When Mutawakkil, who was Ma'mun's nephew, ascended the Abbasid throne, he exonerated and honoured Ahmed bin Hanbal, while disenfranchising the Imam's Mu'tazilite accusers.
أرجو من الله أن أكون قد وفقت في إنصافك يا ابن حنبل.
This is why both Shia and Ash'a'ira despise Mutawakkil as they do.
سنية متعصبة كالمتوكل.
طاغية بني العباس المتوكل لعنة الله عليه.
Even going as far as claiming that the reason for his levelling the built-up structure above Hussein's burial place was because he was a tyrant who hated Ahlul Bayt. As we see in this Shi'i production, where the Sunni Caliph plays the role of the villain, torturing to death his children's tutor, Ya'qub bin as-Sakit, for daring to love the Ahlul Bayt.
أخبرني يا ابن السكيت، هل إن ولدي أحب إليك أم الحسن والحسين؟ أجب على سؤالي يا ابن السكيت. إذا كنت تريد أن يتبدد شكي فيك، أخبرني، هل أن ولدي أحب إليك أم الحسن والحسين؟ قل لي.
إنك لتعلم جيدا إنه لا أنا ولا أي علوي آخر يشهر سيفا بوجه الصبية. وإذ تراني هنا فليس ذلك من أجلك أو من أجل مالك، بل لأخفف من الأذى والظلم والقسوة التي تعامل بها العلويين، ولأعمل كي يستوفوا حقوقهم المهدورة. وإني لأقسم بالله إن شسع علي قنبر خادم مولاي علي لأحب إلي من ولديك هذين.
كفى أيها العجوز الأبلة، كيف تتجرأ يا هذا؟ كيف تتجرأ على ذكر هذا الكلام أمامي؟
بل كيف تجرأت أنت؟ اعلم أن علي
أخرس. خذوه واقطعوا لسانه من قفاه. خذوه.
هيا خذوه. اللعنة عليك وعلى الظالمين من أمثالك أيها المتوكل. اللعنة عليك يا متوكل، اللعنة عليك. اتركوني، دعوني وشأني.
أحسب أن المعتزلة وأهل البدع لم يعرفوا قدرهم بعد، حتى سولت لهم أنفسهم الكذب على أمير المؤمنين.
Just remember, good mutawakkil,
ولا أزكيه على الله.
bad mutawakkil. Fit mutawakkil, fat mutawakkil. Around 2,000 Shiites were killed during the Saudi punitive campaign into Iraq, according to the latter's own biographers. The Shiites and their Ottoman Sufi supporters, as is their custom, greatly inflated the numbers. Numbers inflated and then further conflated with the casualties subsequently counted when nearby bandits, Bedouins and other opportunists set upon Karbala for loot and pillage after the Wahhabi war party had departed. The man who had commanded the 12,000 strong army on Karbala was Emir Saud bin Abdulaziz. He ascended to the rulership of the emirate the following year in 1803 after his brother Abdulaziz was murdered by a Shiite assassin.
Abdulaziz was assassinated by Haji Osman, a Mussulman of the sect of Ali. Abdulaziz had profaned the tomb of Ali and thus excited the fury of the disciples of that prophet. Haji Osman resolved to avenge the ashes of Ali. He crossed the desert of Arabia on a dromedary, entered the tent of Abdulaziz while he was at prayers, and plunged a kangiar into his breast, crying, "Let this avenge the tomb of Ali for thy profanations." The brother of Abdulaziz, hearing the noise, ran into the tent, where he found his brother bathed in his blood, and the assassin, who squatted himself down, saying his prayers and calmly awaiting death. He attacked him, but Haji Osman, who was the strongest of the two, got up and killed his assailant with the same kangiar which was still stained with the blood of his brother. The soldiers then entered and cut the assassin in pieces with their sabers.
A daring and ambitious leader, Saud taunted the Ottoman governor in Baghdad, who had essentially shielded the Shiites from Wahhabi reprisals.
As for your statement that we seized Karbala, slaughtered its people, and took their possessions, then all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. We make no apology for that, and we say, وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ أَمْثَالُهَا, and a similar fate awaits the disbelievers.
Note how the Saudi sovereign took full ownership of the violence his forces visited upon the Karbalites. Considering how openly he was willing, on the basis of a not inconsiderable killing, to claim bragging rights, suggests the Najdi's own figure of around 2,000 slain Shiites is likely to be about right. the British presented themselves as neutral, assuring Emir Saud,
"The British government does not concern itself with the hostilities carried on by you against the members of the Mussulman faith on account of their alleged deviation from the ordinances of the Quran."
But this didn't stop one British official on official visit to Basra, Lieutenant Francis Warden, tale-carrying the conflated numbers of the Diriyan raid on Karbala.
"They pillaged the whole of it and plundered the tomb of Hussein, slaying in the course of the day, with circumstances of peculiar cruelty, above 5,000 of the inhabitants."
A couple of years later, after Karbala, in 1804, the Wahhabis gave the British something else to complain about. Their Qawasim allies ramped up their assaults on the British Royal Navy, the premier world power of the day. I'm not sure if they're the same person. It'd be a remarkable coincidence if they weren't. But by 1809, the Chief Secretary of Britain's Bombay Council also went by the name of Francis Warden. Bombay was the seat of Britain's oceanic mercantile empire, and Warden bemoaned the daring of Diriya's vassals in their vessel seafaring on the Arabian Gulf coast.
"The Qasimi's piracy is nothing more than the result of the Wahhabis inducing them to do so."
In 1809, the British fought a major campaign against the Qasim Federation, but the Diriyan naval right wing took it on the chin, forcing the Brits to have another go at the Wahhabis in the water a full decade later, in 1819. The culling at Karbala and desecration of its domes caused a great deal of disquiet, which reverberated all the way to Constantinople. Predictably, the Shah of Shia Iran, Fath Ali Shah Qajar, was particularly livid. Voicing his dissatisfaction, he demanded the Porte take action. The Qanjar Khanjar expected Salim Khan to unsheath his Khanjar.
I see what you did there. Puns.
Of course, no such protest was lodged in response to the earlier Shiite massacre of the Najdi-escorted Iranian Hajj caravan, even though that massacre was a big part of why the Wahhabis invaded Iraq in the first place. Maybe Shia Hadith will help us appreciate why, for them, Hajjis might not be as valued as Hussainis.
من زار قبر الإمام الحسين عليه السلام يوم عرفة كتب الله له 1000 حجة مع القائم عجل الله فرجه الشريف. بعد و1000 عمرة مع رسول الله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. بعد وعتق 1000 نسمة. بعد وحملان 1000 فرس في سبيل الله. واللي يريد يستكثر خليه يستكثر، ما لنا شغل به، هذه روايات آل محمد عليهم السلام. بعد وسماه الله عبدي الصديق آمن بوعدي. بعد هذه زيارة الحسين عليه السلام. وقالت الملائكة فلان صديق زكاه الله من فوق عرشه وسمي في الأرض كروبيا. كروبي هذول سادة الملائكة والمقربون عند الله.
This is number one.
Bullied into rash action by the Persian king, the Ottoman Sultan would not be, but nor could he let Wahhabi be. So instead, Salim Mark III turned to diplomacy. One of the far-sighted reforms Salim III is recognized for is his establishing permanent diplomatic embassies throughout Christian Europe's capitals. And diplomacy is how the Sultan sought to deal with the Wahhabi issue too. Not only did Salim III not send any soldiers, whether to assist the Meccan Sharifate against Emir Saud or to discipline him for Karbala, the Sultan opted instead to send the Najdi ruler men of the pen, in peace. Sultan Salim sent a scholarly delegation headed by the learned Adam Effendi in an attempt to reach amicable terms with the Wahhabis, or to at least understand them. Adam Effendi remained a guest of the Wahhabis for 13 days, during which time he spoke directly with Saud 5 times. The Ottoman ambassador handed over a letter from his Grand Vizier to the Emir, the main subject of which was the Porte's disapproval of the Wahhabis' sacking of Karbala. Saud retorted that their attack was justified in retribution for Baghdad's belligerence towards Dir'iyah. Besides, as heretics, they were fair game with the Shia. On this point, the Ottoman visitor was not in a position to preach. Constantinople had culled far greater numbers of Shia in their own campaigns, countless tens of thousands in fact. In the forthcoming reign of Selim III's successor, Mahmud II, the Ottomans would sanction the slaughter in a single day, quadruple the number of their own Shiite subjects as the Wahhabis had killed at Karbala. Although Adam Effendi and Amir Saud addressed each other respectfully as Muslims, they could not reconcile their theological differences. Saud gave Adam gifts and assisted him on his journey back to Constantinople. And while Ottomans and Wahhabis couldn't see eye to eye, they wouldn't insist on an eye for an eye, not for the sake of the Shia. All-out war between the Porte and Wahhabistan would have to wait its turn. Besides, if it was blood they were after, Shiism doesn't need Sunnidom to go to war. The self-harming death cult can generate its own gore. Meanwhile, back in the Hijaz, Ghalib had tried to exploit the Iraqi aggression against Banu Saud in the east with his own invasion from the west. But his hopes at a coordinated corralling of Diriyah were dashed. His supporters continued to hemorrhage round about him. One of his commanders was his brother-in-law, Uthman al-Mudayafi. Mudayafi jumped the Sharif's sinking ship, pledging allegiance instead to Emir Abdulaziz in person at Diriyah. In February-March of 1803, this Mudayafi, now a card-carrying Wahhabi, entered Ta'if as conqueror, whereupon a massacre ensued. Mudayafi's men left hundreds of the townspeople lying dead in the streets and houses. This bloodletting of the citizens of Ta'if has left a stain on the Najdi Jihad, quote-unquote, which has been difficult to wash away, even to this day. As for Ghalib, he was left utterly humiliated. He turned his ire against the empire, denouncing the Sultan for inevitably allowing Islam's holy sites to fall into Wahhabi hands. Ottoman authority in Arabia, Ghalib would declare, was null and void. His salty behavior validated the anti-interventionist sentiment among some of the Khan's consultants at Constantinople. As said, one reason the Sultan was so slow to support the Sharifs is because the scholars advising him viewed the dispute between Makkah and Diriyah as an inter-Arab turf war unworthy of Turkic meddling. Sure, Hashemite Hijaz was an Ottoman vassal state, but the cavalier manner in which the province's rulers would conduct themselves as if they were the Sultan's equals didn't endear them towards Constantinople's clerics. Banu Hashim would turn their noses up towards Banu Uthman Khan too steeply to be worth rescuing from their rivals. The seditious streak was to run deep within this branch of the Hashemite clique, for over a century later, with Lawrence of Arabia, the Sharifs would forever sever their Ottoman tether and bind themselves instead to an Arab sheikh. Saud captured Medina in 1804 and Makkah 2 years later in 1806. In the taking of the Hijaz, the Wahhabis spared the population from retribution, and so the conquest was relatively mild compared to the vengeance that had been wreaked upon Ahsa and Taif anyway. The mausoleums of Medina, however, were not shown any quarter, in keeping with the Prophet ﷺ's order. Saud now wrote to Selim directly, inviting the Sultan to similarly purify the lands of Islam from shirk and to return to Tawheed. Writing to the Ottoman governor of Iraq, Saud gave a characteristically Wahhabi appraisal of the Ottomans' mismanaged lands, detailing the condition of Islam under the Turks' territories.
The symbols of disbelief and shirk against Allah are apparent with you, such as constructions of domes over graves, adorning them with lanterns and curtains, and encouraging visitations to them that Allah and His Messenger did not legislate, and taking them as occasions for commemoration, and requesting of their occupants the fulfillment of needs, relief from distress, and alleviation from yearning. And this is alongside the forsaking of religious obligations that Allah has established of 5 daily prayers and other than that, so that whoever wants to pray does so on his own, and whoever forsakes the prayer, no one censures him. Likewise, the zakah. And this matter has become popularized, broadcast, and has filled the ears in many lands, such as the Levant, Iraq, Egypt, and other countries.
Salim seemed to be in no mood to accommodate Saud's preaching, and he certainly didn't want the Ottomans to permanently lose prestige for having lost control of the Hijaz to the Wahhabis. But there were ferocious fires raging much closer to home, fires which threatened to scorch the Sultan's more strategically vital European holdings, worries which occupied the Sultan's armies away from his Arabian wars. And so Saud pressed on, adding Oman and Bahrain to his estate, and extending his authority as far south as Yemen. Uniting the Arabs of the peninsula under a single authority brought about peace, security and prosperity.
For the first time perhaps since the days of Muhammad, a single merchant might traverse the desert of Arabia with perfect safety. And the Bedouins slept without any apprehension that their cattle would be carried off by nocturnal predators.
In closing, we've seen how the Ottoman state was at one stage prepared to tolerate, and who knows, maybe even amicably accommodate, the Wahhabis. That was while Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was alive. Not long after his demise, Banu Uthman Khan and Banu Saud increasingly shifted towards a war footing, some of which could be put down to the ambitions of Muhammad bin Saud's sons, while their father, it's been said, was careful to avoid going against the Ottomans head to head. But the bulk of the blame for the increased belligerence between the two houses must surely lie with the provocations the Dariyans were made to endure on account of the jealousy of Makkah's Sharifs and their Ash'ari Quburi clique, and from the Shia of Iraq, Sharqiyya and Qatif, and the security guarantees the Ottoman suzerain was expected to honour should they find themselves up the creek. Because the Dariyan Emirate did not become a trans-Najdi state until after it took the fight to its foes on its coastal flanks, specifically from 1795, when the hitherto Ottoman-leaning Ahsa'is adopted the Najdi's banner. Then did courtiers in Constantinople really complain and clamour. But even as the Emirate of Dariyya grew to dominate Arabia down to the Indian Ocean, the Sultan still showed nowhere near the concern they did for actual rebels within their perennial provinces of Rum and Rumelia. As we're about to see, the undermining of the Porte's authority in the Balkans by a Serbian nationalist movement, coupled with the tenacity and ambition of a certain Albanian military student, meant that Selim III could ill afford to fight a war in far-off Arabia. Frankly, he had bigger fish to fry, and an even bigger frog. For in 1798, while the Sultan's men were marching out of Iraq on campaign against Dir'iyya, in a whole other campaign that sent shockwaves through the Muslim world, the French had flipped the script. Napoleon Bonaparte had invaded Egypt.